Losing a loved one is one of life's hardest experiences. But what if you didn't have to go through it alone? Death Doula Brooke Nutting is here to talk about the power of support, presence, and honoring life's final chapter. Today, we are diving into a topic that is often difficult, yet profoundly important: end of life care. Today's guest, Brooke Nutting, knows firsthand the impact that compassionate support can have during this transition. After losing her father to Lewy Body dementia in 2015, Brooke's journey led her to become a death doula, providing guidance, emotional support, and practical assistance to individuals and families facing the end of life. Brooke, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Leanne.
I'm so happy that we're having time to have this conversation. Having had you on my panel previously, listening to your story and how you help people was so moving to me emotionally. If I had had somebody like you in my life at other times when I have been with people on their deathbed, it would have been so helpful. And that is why I'm so happy to have you here to share about what you do and how your services can really benefit the entire family.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're making a shift in the end of life world from what we considered it to be a medical event, turning our care of our loved ones over to medical personnel and bringing it back home so that it's no longer a medical event, it's a human event that we get to be part of and experience at end of life.
That is so beautiful. I think it's so wonderful. So let's jump right in. Your journey into end of life care started with a deeply personal experience. Can you share what it was like to care for your father and how that shaped your path into becoming a death doula?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. So my father had Lewy body dementia, was diagnosed early 2010s-ish. And anybody that has been through dementia knows that you begin the grieving process a little bit at each day with the continued loss of your person's personality, their memories, they start to disappear slowly, which was the first time I had ever experienced that. Being around somebody around the dying time was not a new experience for me. I've been doing that for a very long time. But when I was with my father and being one of the two primary caregivers for him, I was able to sit back and observe how well a death can actually occur and the time around it being very meaningful. So in 2015, he was diagnosed, or he was admitted to the hospital with an infectious disease, which meant we had to transition him to an in-hospital hospice unit that was phenomenal. The people that worked there were just amazing at what they did and how they did their work. And I had a friend who was familiar with the dying process and spent some time with me and my family answering a lot of questions around what was happening, why it was happening, and what to expect next. And I found that to be pivotal in my decision to move forward years later in the death and dying industry.
I can certainly understand that. I was able to kind of experience kind of both sides of that. My father-in-law was in a facility. Unfortunately, it was during COVID, so we didn't have that connection with him. In his final days, we were outside a window outside of his room. Um, but then years ago, I lost my mother-in-law to cancer, and I got to be there every day for 6 months and be able to spend that time with her. And so, yeah, I've kind of had both experiences, but I think for either one of those, it would have been very beneficial to me and the family to have somebody with your knowledge to kind of help through the phases.
And I think that's what this death doula industry is bringing back, where we used to not want to be around people who were dying, and we would move kids out of the room or wouldn't allow them to see a person as they were passing. And if I'm being honest, this is a tradition that used to be handed down from generation to generation. And so as I was growing up, my grandmother and my mother, they instilled in me and taught me that not to fear death, but to embrace it as part of the overall human experience. And because I was included at such a young age, my grandfather died when I was just a few days before my 8th birthday. And being 8 and having my parents explain to me what was happening, and yes, continuing with my birthday party, because that was important for an 8-year-old. What about my birthday party at Burger King, right? um, and so showing that it is part of life and it is sad, but we can incorporate all of that into living a good journey through our life experiences. And I think COVID really has brought that to the forefront, where we did have so many people who died without family. I don't necessarily know how many died alone, because I think the nursing staff and the hospitals and the communities that people lived in were there more, but it was so hard on us as family to not be with somebody at the end of their life. And so that really accelerated this paradigm shift of wanting us to not be alone or take a little bit more control back in the overall process and saying goodbye.
Yeah, I will agree with that for sure. It was very different. Even like the services after were
Mhm.
very small. And just like you missed out on all that kind of connection um, with people, with family members, even after that celebration of their life was kind of taken away from us because of COVID.
Yeah.
So, like you said, I think I'm happy that it helped open people's eyes to the importance of having that time with our family members, either before or during or after.
Yeah. Very important.
I wish I had, I didn't grow up where it was talked about it with the children, especially.
Yeah.
We were just supposed to come to the funeral and behave and not show our grief. It was very difficult. So with my children, I tried to invite them in as much as possible. Like with my mother-in-law, my daughter got to be there with her pretty close until the very end. Um, and so it was very different for her than it was for me growing up.
And how much that shift from how you observe death as a young child to your daughter observing death will have lasting effects on her for the rest of her life, and how she views it and how she engages with it, and even how she comforts her friends and loved ones through it. Because I hear a lot how somebody's been put on hospice and then everybody just runs away. You'll get a text message or a phone call. Let me know how I can help you. Let me know what I can do for you. And so at that moment, we as the individual going through that with our loved one, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to ask for. We don't know what help there is. And so in part of my practice, I have a like a sign up form. So when somebody goes, I want to do something for you, I just don't know what it is. They've got a list of things like, can you go to the grocery store for me? Could you bring me a meal? Could you walk the dog? Or could you empty the litter box? Like there are things that still need to get done while your primary focus is helping that loved one labor out. And having somebody there who isn't afraid to engage about conversation, about expectations, the signs that you're going to see, that is a really invaluable service that when I have people, I have clients who experienced it one way with no support or very limited support in a facility style setting, whether that's a hospital or a nursing home or an assisted living facility, versus being at home. It's it's a different experience. And I think a lot of us want to bring that tenderness back home.
Yeah, for sure. I love the sign up idea. For myself, I have always been, that person that just, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'll take care of it, whatever. Um, and never asked for help. Didn't even know how to ask for help because I was raised to be that woman,
Yeah.
those beliefs and those identities that we grow up with, that everything was my responsibility. I was responsible for being the caretaker as well as comforting everybody else, as well as planning the meal, planning the services. I just never had or knew how to accept that help. And so,
Accepting help is really challenging, especially for those of us that are in the caregiver role. I often find that family members get very overwhelmed because they've fulfilled the caregiver role for a long time, usually. Um, and now the entire rest of the family is looking at that person to answer questions of how long is this going to take? How much longer, should we fly in or should we stay away? There's so many questions that come at you as the caregiver that now we can flip that script and we can have a realistic conversation. While none of us know exactly when somebody is going to leave this planet, this physical body, we do see signs and we do see expectations. And so, when I'm meeting with a client 2 months out, and as we get closer and closer to that time of death, I can reach out to people and say, it's time for you to call and bring your loved one in from across the country. If they can't make it, then we do Zoom calls, then we do phone calls. A lot of times when a family member is just tired and needs a break, and bringing a family member in to sit who maybe doesn't understand, I can sit there with them and answer questions and talk about what's going on and help give some guidance and peace to the rest of the family while allowing the caregiver to run home and take a shower in their own home, or go for a walk or go for a drive. So they feel like there's a little bit of support for them to be able to do something that supports them and their mental health through this process.
yeah, that is absolutely valuable. I learned that with my mother-in-law because it was me and my sister-in-law who we would switch days.
Mm-hmm.
And both of us were really blessed with our employers who allowed us that time.
Yeah.
So like my employer, instead of giving me bereavement leave at the end, allowed me to use bereavement time during the time up to her passing. in hour shifts or half a day, so that I could be there to help my sister-in-law. And then she could go work, go home, take a shower. And that was so valuable. And yeah, the signs and having somebody that recognizes the signs and can help you prepare quickly as those signs are happening. We were lucky we had a hospice, but it was right at the very, very end. So maybe the last less than 5 days. And
Yeah,
so,
the average stay on hospice right now is 8 days. So you think about all of the stuff that's getting crammed in those last few days. It's a lot.
it's a lot. And that's why I'm so happy to have you here. We're going to jump back a little bit and talk about your kind of transition from having a successful construction business. What was it like stepping away from that world and embracing this new calling?
So in 2015, when my dad died, I was running a niche construction company with my husband. And it was going great. And so I had that idea, like, if I could ever work in hospice, I would do it. But I wasn't ready to step into that role in 2015. So when we decided to sell our business in 2023, I was able to take a sabbatical and for the first time ever, not leave a job on a Friday and start another one on a Monday. And so by having that roughly 6 month sabbatical, it gave me the opportunity to really sit back and sit with myself and think, gosh, what is it that I want to do now with my next chapter that I'm going to lead in my professional career? And it took a while. It took some time to go like, okay, so maybe I do want to be in hospice, but I know that I don't want to go back to school and be a nurse. I wasn't interested in that avenue. And so I was sitting with a friend in Iowa who looked at me after a visit while I was on sabbatical, and out of the blue, she goes, Brooke, why don't you work in hospice? And I was like, I do. I want to figure this out, but I don't know how I'm going to get paid for it. Like, I don't want to go back to school. And she goes, oh, it will be simple. You'll just be a death doula. And I went, a what? So I pulled out my phone and I Googled death doula and I read that it's a non-medical professional who helps holistically at end of life. And I went, yeah, that is exactly what I want to do. So sitting in a parlor in Iowa started my trajectory of being a death doula. And coming home and telling my husband, because I am a very business driven person where I started my career as an accountant and a CPA, and I investigated fraud, and then I owned a construction company. And I joke with people that there are two things in life that are certain: death and taxes. I started my professional career in taxes and I ended my professional career in death. And it's been very wonderful. It's the most rewarding career that I've ever experienced. And talking with my family and my friends and telling them what I'm doing with this, because death doulas, while it's a doula is somebody who helps labor. So think of a birth doula. It helps to labor us into this world. And a death doula helps us to labor out at the end of the world. And so getting that experience and being with family at such a tender moment, which can be both highly charged emotionally for reasons of all the family dynamics that we experience, is an honor. I get to sit and help people understand what is next, what is coming for them. And I help on other ends too. I help on the planning end. So a lot of times people will ask me, what is it that you want to do with you're planning. And then I help with grief support for as a peer grief companion at the end after their loved one has gone. So this whole new world of being a death doula really was through my education and my training, opening me up to more areas than I expected having my initial conversation with a friend in Iowa.
That is a great story. And I think you and I had discussed the fact that we were both accountants in our previous careers. And I kind of was lucky. I had the same situation. I mean, it didn't come as a choice to go on sabbatical. But I did end up doing like a year and a half of sabbatical while I was healing my physical self and my emotional self and my mental health. But I was also at that position like you, like, what do I want to do next?
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I didn't want to return to the legal field, which I'd been doing for 13 years. Accounting, was a maybe, but I left that role for a specific reason. I did it for 20 years. So I loved what I did, but it, as you can relate, it was kind of a lonely job. I was sitting in an office by myself behind closed doors, wasn't really social. Everything had to be confidential, so leaving that role, transitioning to legal, let me come out of myself and be much more changing my role as far as helping people and being in service to people in a completely different way. But then now, what do I do now?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, mine was kind of a stumble too. I stumbled across getting certified as a health and life coach. And it was going back to school, but it was only a year-long program, which I was able to complete in 6 months. And it wasn't a huge financial burden either. So,
Good.
finding those ways that we can still be in service, when we leave with a servant heart, we want to stay in those roles. And I really loved your story about, how it was just that, hey, why don't you look at this? And that's how I changed from accounting to legal. I was working as an accountant at a law firm. And one of the paralegals asked me if I had ever considered being a paralegal because of my attention to detail and organization and all of that stuff. She was like, man, you'd be a perfect paralegal. So I went back to school. I went to college in my 30s. So,
Which is great.
we were both blessed, with those opportunities to be able to find a role where we get to help people and enjoy what we're doing.
And I think that's the beauty of being able to take a sabbatical, whether it is planned or unexpected. It allows us to be human beings, not human doings. And so by being able to sit and hike and be outdoors, it opened my mind because I had the same thing. Like, do I go back into accounting? Do I go back into fraud investigating? What is it that I want to do next? And none of those things necessarily lit my heart on fire. Like, this is my passion. And so when being presented with this opportunity and being like, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. And I joked with my friend and my husband that who were very good in school and very easy for them. And I went through my training course to be a death doula. And I was like, is this what you guys have been talking about all these years, that like school was easy? Like I understood what they were telling me. It was concepts that just made sense to me. Learning it was the easiest thing I had ever experienced in the education realm.
Yeah, adult learning is very different from learning as a child and, middle school and high school and even early years college, because I didn't go to college until my 30s.
Okay.
And so I definitely had a different appreciation. And I also had adult knowledge and experiences that made that education make much more sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
And even my life coaching education, I learned things that I probably should have known, 20 years prior, like how your body hangs on to trauma and, just so many things like giving
Yeah.
from a full cup. I've
Yeah.
been so
Yeah.
used to being that caregiver and people pleaser that I spent a lifetime giving everything out of my cup and surviving on grounds at the bottom of the cup.
Yeah.
So, this education reinforced the importance of taking care of ourselves so that we are able to be our best self for the people that we take care of.
Yeah, I have a completely different routine now than I ever had before because seeing how much I give of myself to each client, you have to do the self-care that in the past I always was like, I don't really need to do that. It's not important. And now it's yoga practice regularly. It's being out in nature regularly. It is knowing that it's okay to say no if I am feeling low, that I need to take some time to recharge from that. And I don't think I would have learned that had I not gone into this specific type of industry.
Absolutely. Right there with you. Had no idea I should have been doing this all along.
Yeah.
But I think it's like with anything else. You learn things or hear them when you're ready to hear them.
Yep. That is very true.
So you talked a lot about different ways that you support individuals and families. Was there more ways that you didn't cover that we can go into like more detail?
Yeah, I can. Um, so a lot of times when I use the word planning, people think about the business end of death, funeral planning. Do you want a wake? Do you want a living funeral? Do you want a memorial service? What is that? They think about the financial things. Is my will in place? Is my if I have life insurance, is it going to the right people? So that is all definitely part of the planning phase. And I think having a more in-depth conversation, which in the past I'd always had more breezy conversations. And now I have people that come in and go like, okay, so I want to have a funeral when I'm buried in a conventional cemetery that's pretty and green, or I want to be cremated and I want my ashes to be placed in the family plot. And then I talk with them about, did you know that you can do green burial in the state of New Mexico? Usually that means that you don't go through the embalming process, that some people don't want to be cremated. We can look into something called aquamation. We can look into something called natural organic reduction, NOR for short, also known as human composting. While some of these things aren't legal in the state of New Mexico right now, they are legal in close neighboring states. A lot of us want to be cremated because they think that that is a green alternative to traditional burial. I'm sorry, conventional burial, which is in that, green cemetery style with the pretty lawns, which we live in New Mexico and we don't have a lot of water to naturally keep those lawns green. So there are other ways. And what I find in my first planning session, when we get to this type of information, the next meeting they come in and they go, okay, I've completely changed everything. I want to do this now and that now. And they've spent some time figuring out those things. Because as individuals, we all live very unique lives. Why do we think that there's a one size that fits all?
Okay, so you were saying it's not a one size fits all in death.
Yeah. And so when you let people know that they can be as individual in death as they were in life, it really opens up the entire field of what can be done for them. I had a client recently who wanted to have a living funeral. And so we did it at a local brewery here in Albuquerque, and it was great. Everybody came, everybody was happy. She asked me to be there so that when people had specific questions about her and why she was doing it this way, there was somebody other than her who could answer those questions and and help people understand why we were coming together while she was still alive. Because that's not common. It's becoming more common. And it helps with non-religious ceremonies. If you want to have a memorial service or a funeral, and you're looking for somebody who is not necessarily going to MC that memorial service with a religious undertone, which I find a lot of people don't want anymore. So they'll forego doing a funeral or a memorial service just because they don't know where to go to find somebody who can do this for them without a religious aspect. And so that's another service that has evolved from being a death doula. We also, in the death doula world, can help with legacy projects. We can help with maybe figuring out who is going to fill the roles of your executor or your personal representative when you die. Maybe it's about getting a medical power of attorney. And I talk with a lot of people about the pros and cons of having a medical power of attorney may not be best for a loved one to do, especially if you have very defined ideas of what you want your end of life to be, and a son or a daughter may not have those exact same wishes. And so when they come in and say, this is all of my plans and this is everything I'm going to do, and when I ask, what are their values in relation to your values? How do you experience that? And when they say, oh, they're exactly the opposite, in my experience, having seen family members who have polar opposite views, that's not necessarily the right person for you because they may not carry out your wishes as you would hoped they were. And we go through your wishes. What do you want? Do you want all life-saving measures at end of life, or do you not want that? Do you want to be a do not resuscitate, or do you want to be a full code, meaning that they're going to give you CPR if you are crashing? All of these conversations, we think, yeah, like hospice will have that with us, and my doctor will have this with us. And I have seen how very infrequently medical staff will tiptoe around the idea that somebody is dying. Recently, I had a client in a hospital and they were like, we're going to get him better so we can go home. And the doctor and the nurse left. And I turned and looked at the spouse and said, how long has he been reaching out like that in his bed where he's just reaching for something that isn't there? How long was it since he had a full meal? What was his last food intake before you came here? And it was like, oh, he had one bite of dinner. And it's like, those are all signs that I look for and I counsel on and explain, like, I know the hospital wants him to get better. And if you want to take him home so that he can die in his own home, that's important. But that doesn't mean that he's going to get better. And having that intimate conversation with a loved one and them choosing to go, yeah, I knew that this was coming. I knew those signs. Or just telling them what the signs are. And then all of a sudden there's like a little light bulb that goes off in their brain and goes, oh, yeah, he's done all of those things in the last month. Again, our medical system is about getting us better, making us healthier. And so when we get that diagnosis of you're terminal, there is nothing we can do. It changes the way the medical system looks at us and treats us.
Absolutely. Got to experience that as well. And I think too, like funeral homes, if you go to a funeral home to make your final wishes, to make your final plans, they have a different perspective on how they want to counsel you and more in the direction of their services. And I don't want to sound mean about it, but like what they can sell you versus what really do you want, or counseling you on options. I don't think I've ever had somebody from a funeral home even talk about some of the things you mentioned, like, was it
Aquamation.
Aquamation? I want to know more about that.
Okay.
Just that there are options. You know, for my knowledge, it's A or B. Do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? That's it.
Yep.
And just, you know, having a living will in place and going over it with my daughter and saying, okay, these are my wishes. Yes, we should probably do more things to be prepared in advance, because we found that very helpful when my father-in-law passed, because he had taken care of everything.
Good.
Which was very helpful, especially with the fact that we didn't get to be there with him in the end because of COVID. So all of those things were taken care of, and we didn't have to worry about them or think about them or scramble to do them. But we did have, you know, good hospice staff who then was like, okay, it's time. We can let the family in one at a time, you know, very gowned up, wearing masks. It was very kind of cold, but we knew that, you know, that was what was going to happen going into a facility that had been on lockdown from the very beginning. And so just knowing how many options that there are for us, the living, is so incredibly valuable.
And pre-planning, as I talk about it with clients, is a gift in of itself. It's not fun to do. It's not fun to think about and talk about. But when the time comes and your family has this guidebook that they can pull out and see, this is what my wishes are, there's no second guessing. There's no, you know, feeling of remorse, or is this exactly what dad wanted or not wanted? It's so helpful. And I try to explain that to people in giving that gift to your loved ones by spending, you know, that time when you're healthy, thinking about all of these decisions that need to be made.
I love it. I love
And then
it.
going back to your question about aquamation. So aquamation is similar to cremation in the sense that cremation is done with fire. Aquamation is done with water. So your body goes into a large vessel where water is added and a few chemicals to help break down the soft tissue of our body. And then what is left is our mineral deposits, or our bones. And then they are ground up the same way that you would do it in cremation, which is done with fire. And it's a really interesting idea. It's gaining some popularity in other states because, again, of New Mexico's lack of water. I don't think that it's something that will necessarily become legal as a commercial option in New Mexico, but that doesn't matter. If you want something to happen, and this is exactly what I want with my body, we figure out how to get your body to a state that allows that. And there are transport systems that will carry your body to that location so that they can do aquamation for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking about that. Very interesting. Something I had no idea about. I remember when you were giving your presentation for me and my panel, you talked about a box that you help people prepare with like their important documents. Don't remember what it was called, but I was very fascinated by the idea. Can you talk to that real quick?
Sure, there's a couple of options available for that. There's something called Next of Kin box or knock box. You can buy it online, and it basically takes you through a step-by-step process, answering all of the questions that you can possibly think of when it comes to planning phases. I do something similar with clients where I have a checklist and we walk through that and we create a binder. And that binder just lives on your bookshelf. It's a very nondescript binder. And you just let your person or people know that, hey, if something happens to me, go grab the bright pink binder off of my bookcase. And in there has details about what vet my animal belongs with, what food I give them, how often I feed them. It can give details about if you have a lot of plants in your life, how often do you water your plants? If you have life insurance policies, they're stored there. In the sense that it's all written down. So if you need that help, it's one location that you can go and get the details.
I love that because I'm kind of that analytical mind,
Mhm.
and I'm definitely a preparer, and I love binders. Like that is my go-to form of organization,
Yeah.
because at any time I know exactly which binder I need to go to for whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
I keep a binder of my lovely podcast guests because then I can go back and look through my notes and remember specific things that somebody talked about that maybe didn't become a show note. But I have something that I do. I'm trying to remember the exact name of it. So pardon me while I look down. That I created, called a medical history journal.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of came up with the concept of that when I was working as a property manager at a large apartment complex that was prominently elderly tenants. And, we would have a tenant who lived alone, who maybe was in their 80s or plus or minus, and they would fall inside their home, and either nobody would hear them or somebody would hear them, and then they would come and have to get keys so that we could get in there. Then we were having to call 911 and have an ambulance, and then the EMTs would come, and they had all kinds of questions that nobody could answer, and certainly not the person who had fallen or was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And so I created this medical history journal. So it is that binder that sits by your front door that you can hand off to medical personnel and say, this has pretty much any question you're going to want to know: their blood type, their allergies, their primary care physicians, their diet, whatever. And, I just can advise them to please, give this to medical personnel. The EMTs can then hand it off to emergency as they're wheeling somebody in. Then they can hand it off to the physician or make sure it gets to the appropriate person. And I have found that it has been so valuable, not only for the person in there having their own autonomy for their care,
Yeah.
also for any caregivers that maybe go with you to doctor's appointments, because there's also a section for keeping track of past and future doctor appointments. So there's always kind of this current status of what is going on in somebody's life. And yeah, I think that was like the one thing that I really enjoyed creating, that I got to pull from so many different things, water intake, like you said, knowing those signs, like when was the last time they had a meal? When was the last time they had a drink? With my mother-in-law, The only thing we could do was give her sips of water and baby Tylenol for the high fever that came
Yep.
prior to death. But to have somewhere to log that information so that when we did have the hospice nurse come in, we had answers to the question. So, again, I love what you do. I think it is such a valuable, valuable service that you provide.
Thank you.
Um, let's talk a little bit more about your legacy project. I've heard that mentioned before, and I'd like to know more about that.
Sure. So a legacy project is something that you would leave after the fact to allow your loved ones to have a fond memory of you moving forward. The project's one of my favorites is a person who attended a lot of concerts and had a ton of concert t-shirts. They might have been from the 70s or 80s, not necessarily somebody wants to use anymore, but their loved one concerts were really important. So you can turn those shirts into pillows. So it's a soft, warm, even almost a smell that can come back to you as you're holding on to it, or creating a quilt that is then given to the person, the partner or the spouse that's left. So when they're feeling those moments of sadness, they can grab that and curl up with it and feel the love that they had and they shared together. We can do it with recipe cards. That's one of my favorite things to do with clients, especially when it's a mom who's been cooking their entire life. And we pull out the old recipe box and flip through it, and we get details of what is that, who was the recipe originally from? Was it liked at the beginning, or did you end up making tweaks to it? Has it evolved over time? Looking back on with a client that's got their first recipe that they ever made as a small child when they were in like home ec. And that's a recipe that they still continue to use. And putting those into either a binder or a book that can be created, maybe even with snapshots of pictures, creating Christmas cookies. There's the ideas of legacy projects is limitless. We talk about jewelry. There's a lot of times when you're going through loved ones' jewelry boxes after they're gone, and it's not necessarily your personal style. Well, coming to find out that it's not that hard to repurpose that jewelry and take maybe a necklace that's a little ornate, pull it apart, make a set of earrings, or make multiple sets of earrings for all of the family that wants those, or involving a jeweler and saying, this ring has a big piece of turquoise in it, and it's not something that we would wear, but let's create something that I would wear. And so when they put that on, they remember and have a special connection to that person.
I love that idea. I love all of those ideas. I have jewelry from my mother-in-law that just is in a soft bag, and I'll just periodically look at it, with a concept of repurposing it into something that I would use and get to carry her with me is a phenomenal idea.
Yeah. And
Because
it's not that
me
hard
ever
to do.
wearing those things. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's just something that, it's like there's not a lot of value, monetary value in it, but there's a lot of sentimental value in it. And so one of my favorite projects was an old cedar chest that held a grandmother's blankets and handkerchiefs and all of those things. And it was worn and it was beat up, but it can be salvaged. And instead of repairing it and restoring it to its 1950s luster, let's do something crazy and paint it bright red. Let's do something and paint it some funky color that you now have as a statement piece in your house, that people go, what is this? And it's functional. And so instead of ending up in the landfill, it's now become a conversation piece.
I love that too. Love that too. I love the recipe idea. I think back because I actually have like a recipe book that was put together as a bridal shower gift.
Oh.
From every guest, we asked them to bring a recipe.
Mhm.
And I learned how to cook so many meals because I got married when I was 17. I mean, I knew I was raised to be a wife and a mom, so I knew how to cook the traditional New Mexican food. But to collect all these recipes from all these different families, I was able to learn so much and share that with my family and then share those recipes with somebody else. So I really love that idea as well. Those are all just, oh, I love it.
Good. The other fun one is I ask people about what do they want served at their funerals. And it's always funny how many people go like, I want it to be fun and I want to serve champagne. I want to serve beer. I want to serve tea. Like, and so there's still a little bit of them involved in that process. But all of that stuff takes some conversation. It takes getting to know somebody and asking them these questions and allowing us to reframe our brain around what does it actually look like at end of life? And how do we make this individualized?
Yeah, I like that as well because it seems like those things, like the meal after, tend to just be the person who's living and what they think is the best options, or they're the traditions that handed down. Everybody brings a dish.
Yep.
But I like the more personal touch of what would they want.
Mhm.
I love all of that. You make my heart all warm and fuzzy.
And what I like having these conversations because it allows us to think in a different way about the D word, where we talk, death is not a dirty word. It's why I choose the word death doula, because the more we use that word, the less powerful scariness exists with that word. And so by bringing those conversations back in and reframing it and giving somebody a strangely beautiful passing to look back on as a child versus the negative or the scary part of something, like that is what my goal is.
I like that. And I think you kind of went into the question I was going to ask because in a lot of cultures, death is just still a very taboo topic, or
Yeah.
it's very culturally specific. What changes would you like to see in how we talk about and approach death?
I think having something as a natural experience, and knowledge is power, always has been. So what we think in our brain tends to be 10 times worse than what it actually is. And when I have my caregiving classes where I teach caregivers what to expect, especially as end of life approaches, it helps us to remove those negative thoughts around this and gives us the gift of being present with our loved ones. This process isn't going to last forever. And that tends to be a question. And I tend to get called in with people who are like, Mom's been dying for 5 days. I don't know why she won't let go. And it's like, okay, let me come in and chat with her. Well, she's in a sleeping coma, which is what we do as we get closer to death. And I'm like, yeah, but she's still in there. And give me an hour to sit with her, feel her, talk with her, see how she reacts to the questions I ask, work through giving that forgiveness, whether it's for somebody who's wronged us or somebody we've wronged. It's just to help shift our way of thinking around death. It's one of the reasons that myself and 2 other local death doulas created the Death is Not a Dirty Word resource fair, so that we bring people together who are all about the death and dying industry. And you know what you're getting when you walk into that fair. And it was fun, and people were laughing, and people were smiling at that event, because the stigma of this big dark black cloud that hangs over somebody was all lifted, because it's like, no, this is something we can and should be talking about. And I believe the paradigm shift of, we used to do everything at home, right? We would do home funerals, we would keep our family at home. And then we swung to the other end, and it was a medical event, and only the medical professionals know how to handle this. And now we're coming back somewhere in the middle, where if we want to do something at home, we can. If we want to have a home funeral, we can. If we want or need to have a medical intervention, we can. But we can still make that medical intervention feel lovely. We can turn off all of the beeping noises from the machines. We can move the loved one over so that the children can get in bed with their mom one last time and say their goodbyes. We can do that for spouses. We've slept with our spouse for how many ever years, 50 years, 40 years, if we're lucky. And we get that one last moment with them when they take their last breath. So there's just all of these things that I never thought we could do, that it's like, why can't we do it? I'm busting all of these myths of why not? If that's what you want to do, yeah, we can make that happen. And giving people back that choice and that freedom of individuality.
I love all those things. We did some of that with my mother-in-law. Since she had a medical bed, a twin bed that she was in towards the end, then we brought in another twin to be in the room with her, so that, any one of us 3 caregivers, her spouse or me or my sister-in-law, would have that bed to stay in the room with her. A tradition, I don't know, I guess I grew up with it. You were talking about getting to have that time, getting to have that time to see how somebody maybe not verbally responds, but physically may respond to you asking a certain question, like you said, about forgiveness. It's amazing what we hold on to that we don't think about, or that it's not even on the top of our mind, but maybe there at the end, you're stuck in this spot where you haven't given or received forgiveness. Or I've also seen, it was always something that was very important with me growing up, was who do they need to say goodbye to, even if they're not speaking. Who needs to be in the room in those final moments? So we always, kind of discuss those things in advance.
Or who doesn't need to be in the room. And I tend to focus on, the positive relationships that we have with family at end of life. And believe me, there are negative relationships at end of life. And those are important to be honored as well. Sometimes when they're in this sleeping coma and you need somebody to come in and say what needs to be said, it's easier to be done when they're not able to talk back to you. And that's an important aspect of this as well. Honoring the maybe not so great parts of your shared experience. And I find that hospice is really good at managing the medical pain at end of life. Which is done through disease typically. So you have cancer, that can be painful at end of life. And so hospice helps with that. But I help with the mental pain at end of life. I come in, I talk with people, I ask questions, I find out what is the thing that needs to be said. And I had one client who had extreme terminal agitation. There's actually 2 death doulas and a experienced hospice nurse was at this gentleman's passing. And it was the worst terminal agitation that any of us had ever seen. And we're running down all of those things that are mental. What is this? And we get to the point of who needs to be here. Because sometimes people will hold on until that one person arrives. And we don't know who that one person is until they get there. But we see that. And by speaking this gentleman's estranged daughter's name, he went from doing circles in the bed to calm down and taking his last breath within 3 minutes. Just by verbalizing the one child's name that wasn't going to be there because it was such a contentious relationship throughout their life. And family may not know how to say that because you've all experienced growing up and being part of that family. It takes an outsider to come in and go, okay, what are we missing here? Give me some clues. And by hearing that, it's really important at end of life.
Yeah. Wow. You touched on a lot of tough things, tough conversations, some personal tough conversations.
Oh,
So for those who may be facing end of life themselves or someone who's supporting a loved one, what advice would you give to help them prepare for this journey with more peace and presence?
know that this is a hard time. Give yourself some grace and know that the decisions that have to be made at end of life are really, really hard. And be the person you are to them. So a lot of times as we wear our caregiver role, we drop our role of spouse or child. And by having support there, it allows you to go back into your role as a family unit. And that's really, really important in processing the grief that comes from the loss of your person.
That's great advice. One last story from my experience, which came up just as you were saying that in particular, with my mother-in-law. Before she could no longer recognize who anybody was, I specifically remember the last time she recognized me, myself. I was in the room and I had stayed there the night before and was making, changing the sheets and making the bed on the extra little twin bed for the next person. And she specifically said, "You are always doing and doing and doing. Can you just stop?
Oh,
Just stop and just sit with me." That's what I needed to hear to step out of that role, the caregiver role, and be thinking about everybody else to where I really needed to be, which was there for her. So beautiful.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really hard to just sit in the silence. And having her ask you that makes that moment even more special, that you were allowed to be present and with her. And just our existence in that space with them brings them comfort.
Yeah, for sure. So Brooke, your work, I've said it before, I'll say it again, is truly inspiring. I think more people need to know exactly what it is a death doula does and how it can benefit everyone, because we are all going to die. There's no way around it. And to know that we have choices that we can
Mhm.
make for ourselves that give us that piece of something that we can control, as
Mhm.
well as provide that gift to the people that are left to save them from having to think about all these things, I think is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
How can people connect with you and learn more about your services? Because I want to make sure to include all of that information in the show notes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for having me on today. It's been great talking about this thing that I do and love so much. I am available on social media, Facebook and Instagram under Death Doula Professionals. I am on the web at deathdoulaprofessionals.com. And you can reach out via text or phone call at 505-263-7797. And know that just because we're in New Mexico doesn't mean I can't help you in another state. That's often a question I get. And we can do this via Zoom, we can do it via phone call and text, or I can fly to wherever you're going. You need help.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up for sure, because it helps for people to know that your services are virtual as well, and that they're not limited to what may or may not be where they are. Especially people who are maybe in, a small town, or there's just so many other places where if we can provide those services to somebody in their home when they need it, it is so valuable. Um, you also mentioned real quick, I want to just cover this, that you teach classes.
I do. Yeah, so I teach a variety of classes because we just need more education around death. And so I do a caregiving class about every 6 to 8 weeks. I just had that last Saturday, so there'll be another one coming up in a couple of months. And then I do want to be a death doula. So that's for people who are feeling a calling into this industry and they just don't know how to get started or where to get information. And that's done with another death doula that I work with here in Albuquerque. And we do that. We're starting our first one virtually on April 26th from 9 to noon Mountain Time.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
will make sure to include that as well. Because as you know, like with the people that we meet at 1 Million Cups, there are those people that are just still kind of trying to figure out what they want to do with their life. And I've talked to many women there that is something that they're drawn to. And I immediately go, oh, you need to meet Brooke. Where's Brooke?
Thank you. Yeah. It's a growing profession and it's going to get bigger and bigger as we continue to age as a society. And especially with the number of people that don't have children or solo agers, don't have family around, whether by circumstance or by choice. It's an important industry that it is developing.
Agreed. So, Brooke, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing about all the beautiful work that you do. Conversations like this help us reframe how we view death, and not as something that we have to fear, but as a transition that we can navigate with love and peace and dignity. So, thank you. To all of our listeners, I am sure you found this episode very meaningful. Be sure to subscribe and share it with somebody who may need to hear it. And until next time, keep finding resilience and joy in every chapter of your life. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you.